the evening sky. To whom do these celestial steeds belong? When you appear to us like gods on high, what brings you here to mystify?
Welcome to what might be the last Kate Valentine UFO show on this, the 14th day of December 2012. Here to let us know what our chances are of seeing 2013 is John Ventre. John is very qualified to give us his analysis of these possible impending events as the head of the Pennsylvania, Delaware, and West Virginia Mutual UFO Networks. But more importantly, he is the author of 2012, A Prophecy, as well as The Day After 2012. He's also written two other really interesting books, UFOs over Pennsylvania, and I'll probably massacre the pronunciation of this, John. Apophysis, is it?
Apophis.
Apophis. Thank you, John. Well, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Oh, no problem. Well, first of all, let's just get back to your one book, the 2012, A Prophecy. How did you first get interested in this? What did you first hear? When did you first hear about these Mayan prophecies and all the other end-time prophecies?
Yeah, I was, as a kid, I always heard about this December 21st date. But what happened was, back in 1996, I was doing a lot of traveling. I was security director for UPS, state security director, and I was traveling for 18 months straight. And it was really boring, and staying in hotels, and I don't drink. So I said, I want to write a book. And so I was thinking, what can I write about? And I said, well, you can. Y2K, but I said, that's only like 4 years away. I don't know that I can get a book done. I've never written one before. So I was racking my brain, and I said, you know what? I remember hearing about this Mayan thing, this 12/21 date. That gives me plenty of time to get a book done. So I started researching it in '96, and it was amazing. The more I looked, I came across a lot of other type of prophecies from different cultures, different people. But actually, the most significant thing of this research for me is it got me involved in UFOs. Oh. I had, because a lot of times people, if I'm on a UFO show, they'll say, "Well, were you a big UFO fan as a kid?" Nope, never was.
Oh.
So I'm probably one of the few out there who wasn't into this topic of UFOs as a kid. What got me involved in it was doing the research on 2012. And when I came across different prophecies, where these different cultures like the Dogon, the Tibetans, the Mayans, etc., they're talking about people from the stars, people coming from other planets, flying around on flying shields and flying wings, because they didn't know how to describe it. I said, there's something to this UFO stuff. I was always a big sci-fi fan and more into like comic books and horror conventions, but. So I started looking into it, and then I joined MUFON 2 years later in '98 and became their state director a couple of years later. So I've been with them for almost 16 years now.
Yeah, you certainly went right into the deep end of the pool. That's for certain. And you've given so much credence to the field, too. You come off very much as the businessman that you are. And again, as one other credible speaker for the field that sometimes gets put down a little bit too much, I think. But you also uncovered, first of all, what always struck me is, and I've been to some of the conferences where you're a speaker, and the one thing that struck out to me was the fact that the Mayan calendar begins at the end and then goes backwards.
Yeah.
And why that culture should have picked that particular date, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, you know what happens is television, everything in our society right now has to be exaggerated. It's the media effect and all of that. And, a lot of these TV shows are hitting on this end of the world thing. Mm-hmm. But, the Mayans never said anything was going to happen. They never said it was the end of the world. But what the media is really, really missing, because they have to sensationalize everything, is what you just said. These are Stone Age people over 1,000 years ago. I think it was around 980 AD that they developed this calendar. So you got these Stone Age people who happen to get all of this scientific data correct. And the real question is, where'd they get it from? But nobody asks that question. They concentrate on is saying, well, the calendar ends, that's got to be the end of the world. The Mayans didn't say that. What they did say was that we're on a cycle. This will be the end of the fourth cycle and the start of the fifth cycle. And December 21st ends, I guess we're in the age of Pisces right now, and it starts the age of Aquarius.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they got the zodiac, the astronomical signs correct, which last 25,800 years. But here's the thing that's really important when you look at this. They did exactly what you said. They picked the date of December 21st, 2012, and they worked backwards to create this calendar. So the calendar runs from, I think it's 3114 or 3113 BC to 2112. And let me correct something right now.
Okay.
A lot of the bunkers, as a matter of fact, I'm going to be on a big radio show here in Pittsburgh, KDKA radio next week.
Oh.
And when I heard the show a couple of weeks ago, some guy calls in and he says, "Oh, let me tell you all this Mayan stuff's bunk, and I'll tell you why." And I wasn't on the show. I tried calling in to straighten this guy out, and he says, "Well, leap year was created by the Romans, so since the calendar starts in 3000 BC, they got it all wrong. It's off." And Mike, the guy running the radio show don't know the difference. He goes, "Oh, well, that's a great point." So I emailed him, and he's going to have me on the show next week on the 21st, and I'll straighten this out. But here's the answer to that. So that sounds really good that they created leap year and the Mayans got it wrong because leap year was created in the middle of their calendar. But it wasn't, because they started with the date of December 21st and worked backwards. They didn't create the calendar in 3000 BC and go forward. So
Yeah.
you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The leap year thing doesn't apply because their calendar came afterwards. 900 years after leap year, the calendar was created, and they took all of that into account. So from that point, you're really going from 950 or 980, AD to 2112. But here's the thing that's the most important about the Mayan calendar is they had three calendars, and I want to concentrate on the one. One calendar is 5,125 years, which if you go back that time frame, you're really at the building of the pyramids and Stonehenge and that type of architecture. But I want to concentrate on the one calendar that's on a 25,800-year cycle. Okay?
Okay, that's good.
And this is why, and I don't understand why the media and people aren't picking up on this point, is that they created this calendar, right?
Uh-huh.
They're Stone Age people. All of a sudden, they're building expansion bridges. They're doing dentistry. They have mathematics, astronomy. They get all of this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But their calendar is on this 25,800-year cycle, and the planet is also on a 25,800-year cycle. There is no way that these Stone Age people 1,000 years ago could figure this out.
Exactly.
And what I mean when I say the planet is on this 25,800-year cycle, what happens is as the Earth rotates, it's like a top that wobbles, because it's not perfectly round. So the planet wobbles, and every 72 years it changes by 1 degree. All right, so and the planet will kind of rotate, maybe 10 degrees to the left, and then kind of come around a little bit to the right. And I'm not 100% certain that it does a 100% flip over 25,800 years. I think it kind of goes maybe 30 degrees and then comes back 30 degrees. But the point is, if you're looking at the sky, like right now, you don't see the same sky that the Egyptians saw. And I think everybody knows that. When the Egyptians built the pyramids, they lined the 3 pyramids up with Orion's belt, the 3 stars. Well, those stars are not above the pyramids anymore because every 72 years the planet changes 1 degree. It rotates 1 degree. But the whole point is it takes 25,800 years to complete one cycle, one rotation, and you're back where you started. nobody has been able to tell me how Stone Age people can figure that out. They would have had to have, they have these observatories down at their temple of Kukulkan and all of that, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And you can stand there and get it's like you stand there and there's a slit in the ceiling and you can see a star.
Right.
Okay, so what do you tell me? For 72 years they stood there and then they said, well, look, it moved 1 degree in my whole lifetime.
Uh-huh.
Give me a break. So like maybe after 3 lifetimes, 221 years, they say, wow, look at that, that's a 3-degree difference, and you could actually notice it maybe. I doubt it.
I doubt it.
Yeah, I doubt it too. But so here's the question. How did these Stone Age people know that the planet is on this rotation that takes 25,800 years? And the other thing, too, is at the end of that cycle, which is also the end of the zodiac cycle, when the sun rises next Friday morning at 6 a.m., 6:20, whatever it is, when the sun rises and you look at that sunrise, we are in the exact center plane of the Milky Way galaxy when the sun comes up. We're right in the dead center, which happens every 25,800 years.
See, now that should be headlines and not the fact that Lindsay Lohan had another traffic accident.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a big deal.
Even when they talk about the Mayan stuff, they keep saying, well, I was at the gym this morning, right?
Uh-huh.
And the TV was on, so I couldn't hear the words, but they were talking about, sort of headline, is the increase in natural disasters all part of the apocalypse of what's coming? And I didn't have headsets on, so I couldn't see what they were saying. But that's not the point. The point is the Stone Age people mathematically, astronomically figured something out. They also wrote in their sacred text, the Popol Vuh, that there's a dark rift in the center of the sky.
Wow.
So for hundreds of years, nobody knew what the hell that meant, But you go back to maybe 1970 or so, 1982, I think, with our telescopes, we found a black hole in the center of the Milky Way galaxy.
Well, how they knew that, perhaps you can tell us after a quick commercial break, John. Okay. Kate Valentine here. I'm speaking with John Ventre. He is the author of 2012, A Prophecy, and its follow-up book, The Day After 2012. He's also the director of the Delaware, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia Mutual UFO Networks. You can address your comments to John now on AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. After the show, go to his website, JohnVentre.com. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Our guest today is John Ventre. He is the author of 2012, A Prophecy, as well as The Day After 2012. John can address your questions and comments now on AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. After the show, you can go to his website, JohnVentre.com. So, John, just before the break, you were talking about this, that the Mayans had perhaps not discovered, but became aware of this dark rift in the middle of the galaxy.
Yeah, but nobody talks about this. Well, the fact that they discovered there's a black hole in the center of the galaxy, and the fact that they figured out that the planet is on a 25,800-year rotation.
So where do you think they got it from?
Oh, I know where they got it from.
And that is?
And that is Kukulkan. Now, when you look into their history, what they say happened, and I think it was around 986 A.D., this guy shows up, right?
Okay.
He comes, they said he kind of just walked out of the ocean onto the shores there, down by Guatemala or down in Central America where they're located. Actually, down by Cancun it would be, because that's where the Temple of Kukulkan is. And he came walking out onto their shore, into their community, and he's a Caucasian male with long blonde hair, blue eyes, and an elongated skull. Okay? He's the person that gave them all of this knowledge. He said he was from the stars, and he showed up there. He gave them their mathematics, their engineering, their medicine, their dentistry, and their astronomy. So he told them all about this because there's no way you could know there's a black hole in the middle of the sky. I don't know it's there by looking. And there's no way you can look at the sky and know that the planet's on some sort of crazy rotation. It would be impossible to know that, you know? But that's where it came from. It came from this guy, Coco Khan. And what they did was, and you see this in a lot of other civilizations, when kids were born, they would strap those boards onto their heads and try to elongate their skulls because they were trying to emulate this god that showed up on their shore, you know, in their community. And what he had said was he would return in 500 years. Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, Cortez shows up, who they mistook for the return of Coco Khan, and, you know, the leader thought it was the return of their god, Coco Khan. So, you know, and then Cortez, you know, pilfered their gold and brought diseases with him, and it was really the Aztecs at that point because the Mayans they're there, but they weren't a huge society anymore. They had fallen apart. But it came from Coco Khan, and this guy was an extraterrestrial, and he left. And, you know, because you figured they had never seen a white person, and that's how they described him, Caucasian, blonde hair, blue eyes, but with this elongated skull. And that's the thing that you find really interesting, is because we're not born with elongated skulls.
No. But, you know, do you think that when he's gave this date for them to count backwards on the calendar, was that possibly a warning, like when that date occurs, head for the hills sort of a warning? Or was it just, look, this is the cycle, and once that happens, and you're going to go into the next cycle and reset the calendar at that point?
Yeah, it resets. Now, whether he meant that to be a warning or a return of his people, that was never said, you know, you know, pretty much the way the Mayans believe is that everything is cyclical. And you find that, you know, I think in Buddhism and a lot of other cultures around the world who believe in reincarnation and that type of stuff, is that things go cyclically. It's not a straight line. You know, you're born, and then, you know, if you're an infant and you die, that was it. You know, other cultures believe you come back again. Mm. Sometimes you have a great life, sometimes you don't, but it's more about developing your soul, and, you know, because you live many lifetimes. So that's basically what the Mayans were all about. It was that this cycle ends, a new cycle starts. Now, some people believe, if you're more out on, let's say, the West Coast, when I speak out there, they're more into the New Age beliefs, and they believe this is going to be a new evolution for people that you know, we're going to start evolving into this next generation of human beings. You know, humans 2.0, where you know, where we're kinder and gentler and have telepathy and not as violent and aggressive, and you know, that we go on this type of cyclical improvement. But I'll tell you one thing. When I looked up, I said, okay, so it's a 25,800-year cycle. So, you know, my next question was, instead of looking forward to December 21st, what happened 25,800 years ago?
Whoa.
Well, we were in an ice age. There was an ice age started right around that same time, 25,800 years ago. It was also when... what's he called? Cro-Magnon man showed up.
As opposed to Neanderthal.
Yeah, Neanderthals were here a long time, you know, in Europe. But Cro-Magnon also showed up. Huh. But Cro-Magnon was only here 10,000 years during the Ice Age. He died out, you know, around 10,000, 12,000 years ago before the end of the Ice Age. So, I mean, this raises all kinds of questions. If you believe in evolution, you know, I was told we were, you know, chimps and monkeys, and became hominids, who became Neanderthal, who became Cro-Magnon, who became Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, right? Mm-hmm. That's what I was taught. But the Cro-Magnon only showed up 10,000 in the middle of the Ice Age, you know, 25,000 years ago, and he was only there for 10,000 years, and he died off. So evolution doesn't go in a straight line. like we were told in school.
You know, we had Tom Fusco on, and he made some really interesting points about it, that, yeah, there is evolution, but there's something else going on, too.
Absolutely.
Kate Valentine here. I'm speaking to John Ventre. We're on 1160 WVNJ. John is the author of 2012, A Prophecy. So I'm sort of not really holding out a lot of hope for a change in human nature come, December 22nd. Yeah. But, maybe it would be a nice thing, I would think. But what gets me, too, is it's not just the Mayans, but there were some end-time prophecies that sort of fit in with them as well. And, for example, the Hopi Indians that you discuss.
Yeah.
That was really sort of interesting. And then you get into some of the other Indian tribes that built their homes way up because they're expecting another great flood.
Yeah.
For you listening out there, there's some very interesting history in John's books, and really get a hold of them, read them. I think you'll enjoy them. But so what were the Hopis? What was that? There was the Kachinka doll? Was that?
Yeah. I'll tell you about them. But let me just tell you one more point on the Mayans.
Sure.
Is that so I went back those 26,000 years, and we're in an ice age, right?
Okay.
So you go back one more cycle to 50,000 BC. I don't really find any natural disaster, but I do find an Air Force document. It's a chapter that they used to teach their cadets at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs that said that this planet has been visited by extraterrestrials for as long as 50,000 years, and there are three or four different species. So that was 2 cycles ago.
And this was an Air Force manual?
Absolutely. Their physics,
wow.
It's a physics called Physics 370 class that they taught. They taught it from 1968 to 1970 for 3 years. They pulled the course after Project Blue Book in 1970, said they're not going to investigate UFOs, so they pulled the class. They taught this class for 3 years, opening chapter, that this planet has been visited for as long as 50,000 years, and there are 3 or 4 different species of extraterrestrial, and that's a fact. I had that chapter, and that's a fact. That's what it says. So then you go back another cycle. So now we're back 3 cycles.
Okay.
And they say this is the end of the 4th cycle, and we're starting the 5th cycle, which means we're ending basically 108-year, 104, 105-year period, right? So if you go back to the 3rd cycle, there was another ice age. So in 2 of these cycles that the Mayans calendar goes back to, on 2 of them, you have an ice age starting at that same time. So two of the last 3, let's say, there's been a disaster, and one of them kind of talks about the arrival of extraterrestrials.
Wow.
So that was all the interesting stuff on the Mayans.
But again, it is. Well, I think what you said, that tomorrow morning we're going to be just looking right down the throat of the galaxy. I think that's phenomenal. I mean, that's pretty. It's enough to make you get up early, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely going to see the sun come up next Friday. In a week.
Yeah.
So and I was supposed to be at the Temple of Kukulkan next week. I was invited as a speaker down there, and I never had a good feeling about being down there on December 21st. But actually, what ended up happening is they didn't get enough people signing up for their tour down there, and they asked some of the lesser-known speakers, like myself, which they got wrong. Well, they said, if you want to fly yourself down and pay to come down, you can attend our conference. I said, no, thanks. And, actually, what my answer to, because they have Greg Braden speaking down there, right? So I said to the guy running it, I said, has any of your speakers, including Greg Braden, ever been on the Anderson Cooper Show? And he said no. I said, well, I was on the Anderson Cooper Show back in April, so you're cutting the wrong guy out of this tour.
Yeah.
But that's fine. I didn't really, to be honest with you, I didn't have a good feeling about going down, so I won't be down there that day. And then somebody sent me a picture of the temple getting hit with a tidal wave, so that kind of sealed it. I said, I'm not going to be down there.
Well, I'm glad you'll still be with us then, because we got to take a quick commercial break. Kate Valentine here. I'm speaking to John Ventre. He is the author of 2012, A Prophecy, as well as The Day After 2012. If you have questions for John, post them on our website now, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. After the show, for more information on these and John's other books, go to his website, John Ventre, VENTRE.com. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show, 1160 WVNJ. Our guest today is John Ventre. He is the author of 2012, A Prophecy, as well as The Day After 2012. John can address your questions, your comments now on AtlanticCoastUFOs.com, or after the show, go to his website, John Ventre, spelled VENTRE.com. John, during the break, we had an interesting question that came in from Dale, which would sort of lead into your second book. If 12/22/12 is a new age, what will a new age bring? Or is it just a change in dates based on the Earth's position in the galaxy? So, first of all, why did you write The Day After 2012? That's interesting because...
what happened was I gave my 2012 presentation at two different conferences. They were like 2 weeks apart. And in both conferences, somebody stood up and asked a question and said, well, what are you going to say, Mr. Ventre, when nothing happens on 12/21? So, right away my answer was, well, I'm currently writing my new book called The Day After 2012. And everybody laughed. But when I said it the second time at the second conference, I said to myself, you know what? That's a pretty good title to a book.
Yeah, perfect.
So that's how I ended up writing that other book. But, that book really deals with a catastrophe, which was an asteroid strike. And and just kind of a scenario that could take place after that. So, so that's what was in that book. But getting back to that question, there's like I said, the New Age people. I mean, if nothing negative happens, let's say there's no supervolcano or asteroid strike. And did you notice Monday there was a news report that on Saturday or Friday they discovered a asteroid that just missed the Earth?
Yes.
With 2 days' notice.
Yes.
So much for the Sidling Space Observatory and all of those that are tracking these asteroids. They had 2 days. And luckily that asteroid was 150 feet. What if it was a 3-mile asteroid or a 2-mile or 1 mile? That worries me. That stuff, and I even told some people, asked me, and I said, how do you know there's not more of them trailing that one? That was the first one to come by. Maybe there's another one on Friday. I don't know.
And an even bigger one. But
yeah.
At one time, I read an interesting article, and it said the number of people tracking near-Earth objects are less than the number of people in your average McDonald's.
Yeah.
So that's a little scary too. And here I go slaughtering this name again. Apophis. I'm sorry. Yeah. Now that was fascinating too, because that came very close, and that's a huge thing. And
this is the thing that keeps coming up too. Is I like that asteroid Apophis, right?
Thank you.
Because every 7 years it gets closer and closer to Earth. So that got my attention. We discovered this thing in 2004, and it passed by in 2008. And then and actually what happened was, I was in my office in 2008, and I told everybody, when this thing comes by on Friday the 13th, and it always passes by on Friday the 13th, April, Friday the 13th. I said, look in the papers, you're going to see all this information on this asteroid, right? There was nothing written about it. And it comes back again in 2015, 2022, and then 2029 is when it misses us by 22,000 miles. It actually dips below our satellites, which are at 25,000 miles, and it passes by at 22,000 miles. And that's if nothing changes its trajectory, because let's face it, all it has to do is hit a pebble out in space, and it could change a hair, and a hair could be 20,000 miles when it gets back here. So, but the thing that happens is, like, they said, well, that asteroid that passed by, nothing, missed us by that, and there's nothing else going to pass us that close. And I keep saying to myself, how do these people not know about Apophis? And this has happened over the past couple of years, 3 or 4 asteroids that passed by, maybe on the other side of the moon, it was, 50,000 miles, 200,000 miles away. And they never mention this other asteroid that's coming closer and closer and closer. And it's a half a mile asteroid, which would take out a small country, would take out the whole Northeast. Actually, the trajectory is into Nigeria on Apophis. If it did hit, it would take out the entire country of Nigeria.
Well, I think, though, that, possibly the governments are not going to mention this because if there's nothing they can do about it, which is what everyone says about, this so-called doomsday coming up next week. If you can't do anything about it, why get everybody all upset? And
it's great that you said that. Because at some point during this hour, I was going to interject this.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you something that I believe is the absolute policy of governments, and it was said by the Church, by the Vatican. Okay, so I'm at the Ohio MUFON conference. This 82-year-old guy, wobbles up to me with his walker, and he says, "Read this book here. Keep it. It's called The Fatima Secret." Fatima, remember the 3 girls that got the vision, etc., and they never released the 3rd prophecy. So I'm reading this book, right? I get to page 166, and this is what it says. On October 13th, the anniversary, it's kind of funny that was on the 13th also, with Fatima was on the 13th. How you like
Something
that?
about that number, I don't know.
Yeah, it was October 13th. But this is 1996. Cardinal Ratzinger is the Vatican spokesperson, and he finally gives a statement from the Vatican on Fatima, right? It's the 79th anniversary. This is what he says, and I think this applies to ufology. This applies to any natural disaster. Okay, he says, when one reads that the oceans will flood entire portions of land, that human beings will die within minutes and in millions, then one should not desire publication of the secret. Knowledge means responsibility. It is dangerous when someone only wishes to satisfy his curiosity if he is not prepared to do something about his discoveries, or if he is convinced he can do nothing to prevent the prophesied disasters from happening.
Wow.
There is your policy statement right there.
And, I can't say that I disagree with it either. Kate Valentine here. I'm speaking to John Ventre. We're on 1160 WVNJ. I like that aspect of responsibility because there are, and you're the day after 2012. You saw, or actually in 2012, a prophecy, you envision that after a huge natural disaster that we will rapidly go back to a feudal or a tribal state, that the force of law will dissolve. And I think I have to agree with that vision, unfortunately.
Yeah. But here's the thing that happens, and it's actually in that book, the newest one I wrote, Apophis 2029, because in my version, there's a second asteroid trailing Apophis, bigger one, okay? But what happens and what would happen with any natural disaster is the government will continue to go on with their policy of continuity of government. They have these deep underground military bases and bunkers, a select group of people in every country that have these, they're politicians, probably the CIA, FBI, those type of special force people, scientists will be taken down into these bunkers. So they're going to gather up 100,000 people to survive, and they're leaving the rest of us on the surface with no preparation. And then, a couple of months later, they're going to reemerge. Okay. So I kind of have an issue with not telling us that, maybe there's not a lot I can do. I'll go buy more ammunition and some bottles of water, and at some point we're all fighting for survival. So there's probably, from the government's point of view, there's no reason to tell anybody. But, from our point of view, if we're left on the surface and you do have a First Amendment, it was the law that you have to tell us, but you didn't. And I don't want to give away my book there, but at the end of the book, I can tell you the survivors are staked out with bulldozers, cement trucks, etc., at that opening where they left us here and they went down under. So I'm not going to tell you anymore.
I can sort of picture it, though.
Yeah, can't you? They leave us on top and save themselves, and then we make sure they don't get back up again.
Okay, well, that makes a great time to take a quick break again, John. Kate Valentine here. I'm speaking to John Ventre. He is the author of 2012, A Prophecy, the day after 2012. If you have comments or questions for John, you can post them now on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. After the show, you can go to John's website, John Ventre, VENTRE.com. Be right back. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show, 1160 WVNJ. Our guest today is Mr. John Ventre. He is the author of 2012, A Prophecy, and the day after 2012. He has a lot of other interesting books on his website, John Ventre, VENTRE.com. Please go there. It's a really, whether you agree or disagree with the 2012 prophecies, is some very interesting facts in these books. I think you'll enjoy reading them. John, I was just before the break, you were discussing whether or not governments and religions would release information of an upcoming doomsday or not. And I was thinking of Ronald Reagan's speech to the UN, in which he said that perhaps we needed an outside threat to bring humanity together. I think everyone's initial thought about knowing that an asteroid was about to hit in 2 weeks would be that they just go crazy wild. But do you think that after the initial shock that you would be able to bring people together to sort of offset these natural disasters or not? Do you have just a total black view of humanity, or do you think there is some hope for us?
Well, people want to see leadership.
Yes,
and
okay.
if you remember during 9/11, the government's procedure to keep the president safe was to keep moving him around, and that didn't go over very well with the people. They picked him up at that school where he was talking to the kids, and they flew him to one Air Force base in Nebraska. Then they flew him to another one to keep him on the move in case this was an attack by, the Soviet Union or China or somebody, so that they couldn't get the president.
Right.
So, and that didn't go over with the public. What went over well with the public was Rudy Giuliani being down there in New York with a little white mask, with the firemen and stuff. People want leadership.
Right.
And if there's anything I learned from that might have been the government's policy to keep the president safe. It was not a good policy for confidence and for the people to stay calm. They want to see their leaders in times of crisis to be out there at the front and not hiding in some cave with, with a monitor and a American flag behind you, giving a press conference when you're 1,000 feet underground.
Right.
So, I think the government does need to be there. But, the whole point is, can you communicate? Depending on what the situation is, our magnetic fields are at their weakest point right now, and solar flares, electromagnetic fields hitting our planet right now, the flares are strong, and our magnetic fields are weak. I mean, that would fry all of the computers, all of our communications. Any sort of EMP would take that out. So it really depends what it is, and there's, I tell people there's 3 real scenarios that aren't prophecies.
Okay.
They're real things that could happen and one day will happen. One is the, what I just said, a solar flare hitting directly at our planet, and if it's when the magnetic fields are weak, it's going to take out all our electronics, and then you're going to lose all power for months and throw us into feudal times. That's one possibility. And that actually happened in 1859. It fried all our telegraph lines. But we didn't have phones and generating electric and stuff that we had to worry about all of this. But nowadays, it would cripple us. The second scenario is an asteroid strike, which, we talked about, and I talk about that in my books because I kind of lean towards that because it's a surprise that just happens. And, with asteroids, an asteroid has to be over 1 mile in size to affect the planet. Like Apophis is a half mile, that would take out a small country. A mile-wide asteroid, when it hits, actually changes the atmosphere, the environment, would pretty much take out, would take out the better part of the United States if it would have hit. Anything over 3 miles, I believe it's 3 or 4 miles, I believe it's 3 miles, is a extinction event. So the one that hit with the dinosaurs was 6 miles.
Wow.
So that's just some facts on asteroids. I actually learn a lot about different things as I research and I write these books. And the other possibility, so that's two that could happen. The third possibility is the supervolcano. And that one just scares the heck out of me because there's 7 supervolcanoes in the world. 3 happen to be located in North America. 2 are right on the Mexican-U.S. border down by Arizona, Nevada, and they're not active right now. 1 is located at Yellowstone Park, and it is very active. As a matter of fact, it's 40,000 years overdue for blowing. It blows every 600,000 years. It's been 640,000 years. There are times when there's tremors. I read in January there were 21 tremors down there at Yellowstone. The ground swells up 6 feet in certain places. There was one point where there was a lake, small lake, the ground swelled up, the lake moved over, and all the trees were underwater. So Yellowstone, and it's probably the only thing that could take out the United States, because militarily nobody matches us. Even China, what they're doing. I read the USS Ronald Reagan has as much firepower as the entire country of China. So nobody on the outside is going to take us out. But the one thing that could take us down is a supervolcano. If it blows, it leaves 8 feet of ash. All those states get covered in 8 feet of ash, and it's really the acid rain that comes afterwards around the entire planet, killing all the crops, all the plankton. And what happens is 90% of all life dies after a supervolcano. And that's a fact. The last one that blew was the one in Indonesia, and it blew 72,000 years ago. And the gene pool, and the biologists will tell you this, 72,000 years ago, the gene pool shrunk down by 90% around the world because there was no food. You couldn't grow anything. You couldn't drink the water. I mean, it's horrendous.
Yeah. Well, and yet you say that governments have possibly prepared for some catastrophe along these lines with the seed banks and the underground bases and
absolutely.
Yeah.
We built around the world 1,400 seed banks, and the interesting thing was they had to be finished by 2012.
And here we go again.
It's funny. I mean, they build them. Here are the rules. Mm-hmm. It has to be 300 feet above sea level.
Okay.
Because if all the ice in the world melted, sea levels rise 220 feet. That's a fact. If all the ice melts around the world, North and South Pole. So they have to be 300 feet above sea level. They have to be stored at -1 degree, and the seeds will last 1,000 years. And they even say it's because of a natural disaster, a nuclear strike, that type of stuff. So they not only built seed banks, 1,400 of them, around every country has them. England also has a DNA bank that they built where they have DNA from every species, every creature on the planet. So, it's kind of like you think of Noah's Ark.
Yes, really.
And I've said when that movie 2012 came out, if they had any imagination, I could have given them a lot better storyline than what that movie was. At the end of the movie, I would not have been bringing 2 of every animal onto those ships. I would have shown a lab that had little vials labeled lions, tigers, bears. And we have the DNA on them. recreate them and clone them. That's what should have been done. But, you have the deep underground bases, you got seed banks, you got DNA storage. So the plans are there. But the whole point is, continuity of government. Remember that. COG, C-O-G. And you can look it up. You can Google it. People should Google before they giggle, because all of these things are out there. And that's out there. But the select few are going to be saved. I'm 55 years old. Nobody's saving me.
I don't know, John. I think you'll be there.
I'll be here with my guns, my 90-pound Doberman, and my guns, and I'll be looking for food and water is what I'll be doing.
Okay, well, your address is off our list, then I guess you'll
Yeah.
We had to make the mood just a little bit lighter, Steve said in a comment, he said he was wondering if Pope John the 23rd was privy to the Fatima letter, because he heard that the Pope cried after reading the letter, and then someone said it was because it was the bill for the Last Supper. So I don't know. But, I think really the head of major religions are, in a sense, the heads of government, too, and they also have to prepare for that as well, because people, you're right, they look to leaders, and I think if we are to survive some natural catastrophe, I think you're quite right. We need some very strong leadership, someone that will get up and say, look, you can max out your plastic, but there's nothing left to buy, so you better get real and start planting some seed banks and some food and water, because that's going to be a lot more important than a 60-inch TV set.
Yeah. Well, if you go to the FEMA website and you look up, the plans for, natural disasters and prepping and all of that, it says right there on the website, there are 310 million people in this country. We cannot protect all of you. We can help. We're lucky we can help 1 million people. And I'm paraphrasing. And it basically tells you what you need to do. You need to store water. You need to store food, and then rotate that food and eat it, so it doesn't stay there forever.
Right.
And it gives you a whole list of things of what you need to prepare. Have batteries, rotate everything. Have water. Have purification systems. And I have this stuff. There's little pumps you can buy where you could take water and then you put a drop of this stuff in it and it clears out all the bacteria and you can drink it. There's things you can do like that. But they can't. They even say on the FEMA website they can't take care of us. You can't. There's 7 billion people in the world. How are you going to protect them? And even the most modern country like us, probably 100,000 people is all that they could take care of in case of a disaster.
Well, you made two comments in your book, The Day After 2012, and one was that once a civilization enters a digital age and the digital electronics, technology, whatever, is disrupted, let's say with a solar flare or whatever, your history is totally wiped off at that time. And I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're quite right.
Yeah,
that'll be the end of the history.
Yeah. Well, you think, I'm not certain that we're the most advanced civilization ever to live on this planet. Because it only takes 500 years, and everything we built would have rotted, decayed, and been gone.
Yeah.
The planet's, 4.6 billion years old? I mean, how do we know 1 billion years ago there wasn't an entire advanced civilization here? But when you get to the point of everything being electronic, and then it goes... What record do you have back? As a matter of fact, there's probably only 2 things that would be left right now if we were to get totally destroyed. Mount Rushmore, because it was carved in granite, and plastic bottles. So probably, people would find a plastic water bottle, under 20 feet of dirt. And then that's it. Outside of that, every building, every car, everything after 500 years is gone.
But the pyramids would still be there, too.
Yeah, those type. And the pyramids in Rome, the Colosseum are in such bad shape. Yeah. The pyramids would be under sand. You'd have to dig them up again. But as far as modern things, let's put it that way, the only modern thing built in the last 200 years that would still be there would be Mount Rushmore.
That's pretty interesting, because perhaps the pyramids are what's left over from some ancient civilization. It was their Mount Rushmore in a sense. You know, yeah, I have to agree with you. I've always felt that there was something here earlier, and a lot of the myths are not so much aliens, but from a prior civilization. But
keep thinking of that movie Planet of the Apes.
Yeah,
you know, as a kid, I watched it. I loved it. Now I understand it. That the simians would do anything to keep the truth away from the apes. That humans were here first and were able to speak, and that was so prophetic. That's the way the government and religion is. If you find something that doesn't fit the current theories, you cover it up. You throw it away. You don't bring out of place information that changes everything, because they don't want change.
No, that is the one thing with government. It's the constancy. It has to be constant. It has to be.
And religion.
And religion too. But I don't know, John. We've sort of come to the end of the hour, and
not the end.
Not the end. I hope not. I sort of hesitate to wish anybody a Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays after this hour.
You know, I went to LA Fitness right before getting on your show, and I signed up for 3 years.
Okay,
so I am positive something's not going to happen.
Okay, great.
Other than I'll get in better shape.
Okay, great to know. Thank you so much for being here. And again, for really fascinating reading, go to John's website, johnventre.com. Bill, Dave, as always, thank you so much for being here, for supporting the show. And let's hope we'll all still be here next Friday. Thank you for listening. You make the show even more interesting.
Comic books and, horror conventions. But so I started looking into it, and then I joined MUFON 2 years later in '98 and became their state director a couple of years later. So I've been with them for almost 16 years now.
Yeah, you certainly went right into the deep end of the pool. That's for certain. And you've given so much credence to the field too. You come off very much as the businessman that you are, and again, as one other credible speaker for the field that sometimes gets put down a little bit too much, I think. But you also uncovered. First of all, what always struck me is, and I've been to some of the conferences where you are a speaker, and the one thing that struck out to me was the fact that the Mayan calendar begins at the end and then goes backwards.
Yeah.
And why that culture should have picked that particular date, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, you know what happens is television, everything in our society right now has to be exaggerated. It's the media effect and all of that. And, a lot of these TV shows are hitting on this end of the world thing. Mm-hmm. But, the Mayans never said anything was going to happen. They never said it was the end of the world. But what the media is really, really missing, because they have to sensationalize everything, is what you just said. I mean, these are state security director, and I was traveling for 18 months straight, and it was really boring, and staying in hotels, and I don't drink. So I said, I want to write a book, and so I was thinking, what can I write about? And I said, well, you can, Y2K, but I said, that's only like 4 years away. I don't know that I can get a book done. I've never written one before. So I was racking my brain, and I said, you know what? I remember hearing about this Mayan thing, this 12/21 date. That gives me plenty of time to get a book done. So I started researching it in '96, and it was amazing. The more I looked, I came across a lot of other type of prophecies from different cultures, different people. But actually, the most significant thing of this research for me is it got me involved in UFOs. Oh. I had. Because a lot of times people, if I'm on a UFO show, they'll say, well, were you a big UFO fan as a kid? Nope, never was.
Oh.
So I'm probably one of the few out there who wasn't into this topic of UFOs as a kid. What got me involved in it was doing the research on 2012. And when I came across different prophecies, where these different cultures like the Dogon, the Tibetans, the Mayans, etc., they're talking about people from the stars, people coming from other planets, flying around on flying shields and flying wings, because they didn't know how to describe it. I said, there's something to this UFO stuff. I was always a big sci-fi fan and more into, like...
Mighty phantoms of the evening sky, to whom do these celestial steeds belong, when you appear to us like gods on high, which brings you here to mystify.
Welcome to what might be the last Kate Valentine UFO Show on this, the 14th day of December 2012. Here to let us know what our chances are of seeing 2013 is John Ventre. John is very qualified to give us his analysis of these possible impending events as the head of the Pennsylvania, Delaware, and West Virginia Mutual UFO Networks. But more importantly, he is the author of 2012, A Prophecy, as well as The Day After 2012. He's also written two other really interesting books, UFOs over Pennsylvania, and I'll probably massacre the pronunciation of this, John. Apophysis, is it?
Apophis.
Apophis. Thank you, John. Well, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Oh, no problem. Well, first of all, let's just get back to your one book, the 2012, A Prophecy. How did you first get interested in this? What did you first hear? When did you first hear about these Mayan prophecies and all the other end-time prophecies?
Yeah, I was, as a kid, I always heard about this December 21st date. But what happened was, back in 1996, I was doing a lot of traveling. I was the security director for UPS. Stone Age people, over 1,000 years ago, I think it was around 980 AD that they developed this calendar. So you got these Stone Age people who happen to get all of this scientific data correct. And the real question is, where'd they get it from? But nobody asks that question. All they concentrate on is saying, well, the calendar ends, that's got to be the end of the world. The Mayans didn't say that. What they did say was that we're on a cycle. This will be the end of the fourth cycle and the start of the fifth cycle. And December 21st ends, I guess we're in the age of Pisces right now, and it starts the age of Aquarius. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they got the zodiac, the astronomical signs correct, which last 25,800 years. But here's the thing that's really important when you look at this. They did exactly what you said. They picked the date of December 21st, 2012, and they worked backwards to create this calendar. So the calendar runs from, I think it's 3114 or 3113 BC to 2112. And let me correct something right now.
Okay.
A lot of the bunkers, as a matter of fact, I'm going to be on a big radio show here in Pittsburgh, KDKA radio next week.
Ooh.
And when I heard the show a couple of weeks ago, some guy calls in and he says, "Oh, let me tell you, all this Mayan stuff's bunk, and I'll tell you why." And I wasn't on the show. I tried calling in to straighten this guy out, and he says, "Well, leap year was created by the Romans. So since the calendar starts in 3000 BC, they got it all wrong. It's off." And Mike, the guy running the radio show don't know the difference. He goes, "Oh, well, that's a great point." So I emailed him, and he's going to have me on the show next week on the 21st, and I'll straighten this out. But here's the answer to that. So that sounds really good that they created leap year, and the Mayans got it wrong because leap year was created in the middle of their calendar. But it wasn't, because they started with the date of December 21st and worked backwards. They didn't create the calendar in 3000 BC and go forward. So
Yeah.
you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The leap year thing doesn't apply because their calendar came afterwards. 900 years after leap year, the calendar was created, and they took all of that into account. So from that point, you're really going from 950 or 980, AD to 2112. But here's the thing that's the most important about the Mayan calendar is they had three calendars, and I want to concentrate on the one. One calendar is 5,125 years, which if you go back that time frame, you're really at the building of the pyramids and Stonehenge and that type of architecture. But I want to concentrate on the one calendar that's on a 25,800 year cycle. Okay?
Okay, that's good.
And this is why, and I don't understand why the media and people aren't picking up on this point, is that they created this calendar.